This next conversation will be a big one. We're thrilled to have one of the most senior leaders from the CFPB here to discuss one of their top initiatives, their consumer complaint database. Learn what's actually inside the database and how the Bureau and others are using it. Please join me in welcoming up on stage Scott Steckel, Stakeholder Engagement Program Manager at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back after lunch. It's great to see everybody that came back. It's certainly a great day to be in New York City, right? Is it a great day to be in New York? It's also a great day not to be in Washington, D.C., so I want to thank PerformLine and everybody for having me here today. We thought that right after lunch would be a great time to go through a deep dive analysis of the 750,000 complaints in the consumer complaint database. So are we up for that right about now? Okay, actually no. You know, PerformLine does a great job of analyzing the data. Many of you have worked with the data. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in the CFPB's Office of Consumer Response. And I want to follow through a little bit. I do come from Washington, D.C., so of course I come with a legal disclaimer. I'll just leave this up there a little bit. My job title is Stakeholder Engagement Program Manager. So what does that mean exactly? That means that a lot of my colleagues at the Bureau don't know exactly what I do, but they think I'm pretty good at it. But what I do as I work in the Office of Consumer Response, and I want to talk to you about what our office does and what my colleagues do in consumer response. This will give you a little bit of insight to what the data is in the database, how the data gets there, and how the complaint process works that facilitates the publication of that data. We do a couple of things, and we do a couple of things real well. We answer questions, we handle complaints, and then we analyze and we share the data associated with the complaints. Now, the Consumer Response Office and the CFPB, many of you don't know, we operate 2 US-based call centers. 2 US-based call centers. We handle more than 20,000 consumer phone calls a month. We answer questions from consumers and we handle complaints. So when I think US-based call centers, when I think 20,000 phone calls a month, again, I'm thinking American workers answering questions for American consumers. Our team does a real good job about that. We answer questions, we provide information about financial products and services, and of course we handle complaints, and we handle complaints to help consumers connect with financial companies when they're having a problem or an issue. We try to connect them directly with the company, and I will go through the process a little bit. Again, how we answer those questions and handle complaints. By telephone, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. We're available at 855-411-CFPB. We'll talk with consumers, we'll answer the questions, we'll handle their complaints. But a lot of the complaints, I want to share a little bit of data. I promise not 700,000 complaints, but we'll go over a little bit on just what we handled in 2016. About 291,000 complaints came into the Bureau. In 2016, and you see kind of the products, the main products and services that consumers had issues with. Debt collection, credit reporting, mortgage was the top product or service that consumers had challenges with and came to the Bureau with complaints. How do they get to us? You see about 73% use our website, consumerfinance.gov. So a lot of consumers are connected. They're reaching us through our website. We have an innovative complaint form. They can fill out the information online, do their complaint process totally online with us. About 7% come through the telephone call. Again, shows you again, a lot of the phone calls we get do not turn into complaints. We're answering questions. We're providing a service to consumers, helping them understand financial products and services. We also receive referrals, about 12% of the complaints. About 68% of what we received in complaints were sent to companies. I'll talk a little bit briefly about our process. We were sent to companies for review and response. We also refer complaints to other regulators. One of the things with creating our office and the role that our office fills through the Dodd-Frank Act is this as a centralized collector of complaints. You know, a consumer doesn't have to worry and wonder, well, wait a minute, is this a bank? What's the bank's charter? Is this a non-bank company? Who do I go to when I have a problem with this? ConsumerFinance.gov and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is one centralized source that if they've got a problem with a consumer financial product or service, they come to one place, they can submit the complaint. If it doesn't belong with us, we know where to get it without additional work on the part of the consumer. So we can make that referral. We refer things to the prudential regulators. We could share complaint data with the FTC through the Consumer Sentinel. So this gives you a little bit of some background, and of course some of the complaints that we've received as of December 31st were still pending either with a consumer or with the CFPB. Complaint process. We receive the complaint. We review it for completeness. We have to have some minimum information, of course, from the consumer. We make sure it's about a consumer financial product or service. We review that complaint and it will route it to companies. Now, how do we get 291,000 complaints to companies? Well, of course, we send it by certified mail with a return signature guaranteed. No, I'm just kidding about that. What we do is we have an innovative company portal. It's a secure company portal. We have about 4,000 companies, banks, non-banks, of all different shapes, registered on the company portal to receive complaints. It's an efficient way we can transfer the complaint. There's good data security around that to protect the consumer's privacy. We also protect the company's privacy in their response to that. So it's a secure portal called the company portal. Companies are registered on that. They receive the complaint, and they can respond securely to that complaint right in that internet web portal called the company portal. So the first thing we do when we get a complaint, we send it to the company, identify it, get it right to that company, have the company respond. We ask for the company's response in 15 days, a timely response in 15 calendar days. We do a couple of other things, and we do some things that are kind of innovative and new for a regulator. One of the things we do is, of course, we know we have a consumer complaint database, but we also give the consumer the ability to publish what we call the consumer narrative. So if a consumer comes to us and they want to tell their what happened, they tell their story about what happened with that financial product or service, they can publish that and tell us, I want you to publish my story and my narrative in your complaint database. The consumer has one option to do that when they submit the complaint, when they first come to us. They don't have to do that. If they do elect to publish that narrative, we will redact all the personal identifiers, and the consumer can call us if they change their mind at any time. If somebody was a little hot, a little frustrated, they submitted the complaint and they decide the next day, hey, I really don't want to put that story out there. They pick up the phone, they call us, and we can take that narrative down. So a little bit of background on the publication of the narrative. When the company responds to the complaint, again, they're responding to the consumer and the CFPB at the same time. So what we're really doing is we want to connect the consumer with the financial company. Maybe it's a consumer that had some challenges and they couldn't find the right entry point at the company. What we do is we make sure we get it to the right place and the company pays attention to that. A little bit of data. Again, I promise not too much data. How have companies responded to complaints? They've been pretty timely. And you can see approximately 97% of complaints that we've sent to companies get a timely response. So timeliness is important. A couple of things that you'll see in PerformLine has more information in their analysis, but there's three main categories of closing complaints. Close with monetary relief, pretty straightforward. I gave some money. Consumer says, I was overcharged $50. Company says, I'll give you the $50 back. Close with monetary relief. Non-monetary relief. What's non-monetary relief? It's something that's specific. It's something that's documented. It's something that's, example I will use, and my mother over in Allentown, Pennsylvania, still balances her bank checking account to the penny with a pencil and no calculator every month. But her vision's not so good, and she needs a large print bank statement. So when her bank wouldn't get her a large print bank statement, and she had frustration asking the branch manager to get a large print bank statement, we submitted a complaint. And what the bank said is, you better believe we'll give her a large print bank statement. And their response was the non-monetary relief. They reacted, they responded, and they gave my mom what she was looking for, and she was happy, and she might be balancing her bank statement today. And she might be calling me if she's 3 cents off. So I may have some work to do later on. The other thing is a close with explanation. You see, a lot of complaints are closed with explanation. And in that situation, it might be a situation, again, where the company and the consumer have just misconnected. Maybe the consumer doesn't understand why something happened. They don't understand the way the product worked. They don't understand why an action was taken, and they didn't get that information from the point of contact that they were reaching with before. And the company will say, here's exactly what happened, here's why it would happen. So 3 main categories there. There's a few others in here. You can see, there's an older category that we had on some of the legacy complaints. The early complaints when we started taking complaints was just a simple closed. Not a lot of companies were using that. That would be a simple, case closed, like the old Archie Bunker case closed without an explanation. You can imagine not many companies would want to use that. Administrative responses. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's a private response that a company can send to us. And there's a lot of reasons why they might want to do that. Before I get into some of the administrative response things, I want to talk about the different types of data that we receive, what we do with it, and then again, the data that's in the public database. And there's really 2 different things. There's the structured data, of course. What's structured data? Things like the consumer identified product. What's the product? What's the subproduct? What's the issue that you were having? Now, we ask every consumer on the complaints, whether it's by phone or coming in through our complaint form, to pick from a set list of categories. Give me a general category and pick one of what your problem is, what you're saying the problem is. You've told me that it's a vehicle loan. Now tell me what your problem is and pick from this list. That's the structured data. And we go down to subproducts and sub-issues for that. I mentioned the company response category, and again, that's another piece of structured data. You can see that in a database and see how that company decided to respond to that complaint. Did they provide monetary relief? Did they provide some other type of relief, or was it an explanation? In our first several years, what we also provided is a consumer feedback mechanism. And it was a simple mechanism where we said to the consumer, after you get the response from the company, let us know if you want to dispute that. The database has dispute information from where basically consumers, and it averaged about 20 to 24% of complaints where after a company responded, a consumer could dispute that response. We looked at that over a number of years and we said, okay, well, number one, it's only negative. It doesn't provide any additional feedback, and it's somewhat limited. Again, it's just a dispute. The value of whether the consumer disputed it, why did they dispute it? There's some challenges in figuring out, are they just mad about that? Was there additional information? So we recently eliminated the consumer dispute. Over the past year or so, we published a couple of things in the Federal Register, a request for information asking for feedback on different things. Number one, how to collect complimentary feedback from consumers. And we also published a company response survey proposal that we wanted to collect basically more structured feedback from the consumer. Okay, now that the company has responded, answer a couple of questions and tell us a little more about that. Those things are still an open work in progress, so I don't have a lot of details for you right now on that, but it's something to stay tuned, and hopefully we talk a little bit more about the implementation of that as the year goes on. So again, unstructured data, consumer-provided narrative description. Again, we talked about the unstructured. That's the one piece of unstructured data that a consumer could put in the public database. We, of course, receive that. The company sees that on all the complaints. Consumers may provide a document, maybe an attachment, maybe a copy of a statement if they have a problem with something they got in the mail. Companies provide also a narrative in the response. What's the company's response? If it's a close with explanation, what was that explanation? Companies provides documents to us, and again, I mentioned the consumer feedback. So different types of data that's available. Some of it's public, some of it's non-public. How do we analyze the data? And this is the thing, again, number one, we publish the data and we put a lot of the structured data so the marketplace can see that. And this is valuable to industry observers, it's valuable to academics, it's valuable to research, it's also valuable to industry, again, to look at, and it's one place where industry can sort of do their own benchmarking and see. Okay, hey, here are 5 peers that let me see what they're seeing from their customers, and let me see how I look relative to that. So, whereas from time to time there's some controversy around publishing complaint data. Again, as a former banker, I remember too the days that, boy, what are the consumers thinking of me? What are the consumers thinking of my competitor? So in some ways you can get some of that information. It's available free. So a company can look at that and benchmark and say, well, we're thinking of getting into this business. What are some of the pitfalls? Who has a lot of complaints about a certain issue? How are the consumers understanding the product? So information that's out there in that database. We can, of course, continuously monitor things. We've got a lot of technology internally, so we monitor spikes and trends. We can look at geographical areas. We can look at things with issues of a certain product. If we're looking at things, we use that information, again, in our supervisory work. Of course, it's shared with our enforcement division as well. And it's also shared with, again, we've got some specialty offices. We've got an Office of Service Member Affairs. We've got an office that works on issues with older Americans. These are, again, specialty populations and groups where there may be some unique challenges that they're having in the marketplace. So this information is available to us. We also use it to help our consumer education and engagement work. So from that standpoint, again, a lot of things is, again, we mentioned a lot of close with explanations, a lot of maybe some consumer understanding of products and services. We continue to use this type of information to develop tools and resources. We've got something called Ask CFPB. So not only by phone, but on the website, we put a lot of information for consumers to understand how things work, how the products work, how they can take some issues and resolve some problems, and get the tools that they need to deal with issues when the issues come up. And of course, we talked about the feedback a little bit, and as we're coming down, just a few minutes left, I don't want to take too much time, but the analysis that we do feeds into a lot of the Bureau's work. It feeds into, again, if an examiner is going to be able to go out, or somebody's going to go out and take a look at, number one, it can help them with the exam preparation, help them ask targeted questions. It helps them with prioritization, of course, and understanding, again, either by product line, by particular companies, or by emerging issues. So a number of different ways that we use the data, again, continue to publish it. Consumer complaint database is available on our websites, generally refreshed every day. And I want to share a couple of key facts with this, and it's kind of important, some key facts, because a lot of misunderstandings about the data in the process that sometimes no matter how good you are at analyzing the data, if you misunderstand, if you don't know the details in the background of the process, again, complaints. What is a complaint? You'll see in the definition of a complaint here, you don't see regulatory violation anywhere. So in many situations, somebody may say that, okay, well, a complaint, there must be something, a regulatory violation. We didn't say that at all. We said it's a consumer's submission of dissatisfaction or wrongful conduct by an identifiable entity, and it's relating to a consumer financial product or services. So again, the Bureau didn't say that it's a regulatory violation. The Bureau also doesn't put anything in without verifying the commercial relationship. Now, sometimes I get some questions about that, and they say, Scott, how can you verify the commercial relationship with a company? And we came out with an ingenious way of doing that. And it really took a lot of time for us to figure out. You know how we do that? We ask the company. We say, is this your customer? And the company tells us yes or no. So, and what we did is we made it really burdensome and cumbersome for the company to respond to that. We gave them a button on the internet portal that they can click and say incorrect company and type in this is not my company. So again, it's not a lot of wizardry and regulatory mumbo jumbo and everything. It's simple. If this is not your customer, you looked in the records, this is not my customer. We don't publish that in the database. Pretty streamlined process there. A couple of clicks on the internet. Obviously, companies, you can see with their responsiveness, companies are paying attention to this. They know that it's important, and companies want to connect with their customers and want to get their customers a timely response. But if it's not their customer, again, some feedback that, oh, anybody can go into the CFPB and they'll publish a complaint and they'll slander a company. That's not true. It has to be a customer of that company. Now, what we do is we also say in the database, again, we don't verify all the facts. associated with that. We do allow companies the chance to respond publicly. We've given companies in the public, if you will, in their portal, in the company portal, we've given them a list of 9 structured categories to the extent that they wish to put a response in there to go along with any complaint that they received. Companies can do that. We don't force them to do that. It's completely optional. Some companies do that. Some companies simply want to be able to let the public know that they've responded to their customer, but they want to respond privately, but they don't want to put a public response out there. So again, we've given companies tools to be able to manage, if you will, however it fits their brand and however it fits that their public position if they want to respond to complaints. So the database, I think, again, when I last looked, it was somewhere about 750,000 complaints. It's refreshed daily, and it's a great source of information for again, folks in industry, observers, consumer advocates, industry advocates, and I appreciate the chance to be able to give everybody a little bit of an overview of our process, the work that we do. And I want to make sure that we've got a little time for some Q&A. So I hope we've got some early afternoon questions about the database or about the process, and I'd be glad to handle them.
So you've seen a lot of the data, whether or not it's structured or unstructured. Any patterns you can share? I'm right over here.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Any patterns you can share in terms of the demographics of customers or consumers, I should say, that are likely to submit complaints?
That's a great question. One of the things that we do is we don't collect currently demographic information on consumers. So it's not part of the complaint process to currently collect that. Now, one of the things that we do publish in the database is the consumer's zip code. The state and the zip code is in there. So there have been some observers that have looked at and sort of done some census tract work or geocoding with that. But again, we don't put that information out. The only thing we do is put out there if a consumer wants to self-identify, they're a service member, or spouse or dependent of a service member, we'll put that tag out there. Or if they want to identify that they're an older American, again, but that's totally optional on the consumer standpoint. But it's a great question. We get that a lot, but we don't currently collect the demographic information. One of the things as a federal government agency, if we do collect information, we've got to go through something called the Paperwork Reduction Act. So we've got to go into the Office of Management Budget and actually put out in the Federal Register and explain why the government should collect that information, what would be the burden on consumers, what would be the use of that. So it's an interesting discussion, and I think it's an interesting point on potential value of asking that. Great question. Thanks.
Well, first of all, thank you for the overview. I work for a large issuer, and we pay close attention, obviously, to the trends. And one of the things that we've tried to do is do targeted testing based on the feedback. So not just handling the individual complaints, but also do some targeted testing. So, and one of the things that we've identified is that sometimes when the customer puts in the category, doesn't necessarily match what we're finding out. And I guess my question is, are there any former channels to engage CFPB in maybe redesigning the product or adding some more, getting some more clarification from the consumer? So when we use that data, we can actually look for the right thing versus, I'll give you an example, disputes versus fraud, where consumer says, I didn't authorize this, which oftentimes gets into fraud, but you're finding later on that's actually more of a merchant dispute type of a question. So what ways are there out there for us to engage with CFPB to maybe redesign the product or add some additional features?
That's a great question, and of course it's one that we've kind of continued to struggle with, look at, evaluate, and discuss, and it's really talking about that, helping consumers identify that product and issue, and really, since we're giving, one of the things that we've done is we decided it's not a multi-select, so they've got to pick the best category. We recently went through and we worked with our experts and markets regulations. We tried to get some industry feedback to try to redesign the product and issue categories. So on April 24th, we kind of changed the complaint forms around a little bit and changed some of the helper text to try to see if we could get consumers to pinpoint better and select the right thing. One of the things we used to do is the consumers used to have to come in, because we expanded over a period of years, we had 11 different complaint forms. So a consumer's intake would first have to pick a certain form, and if they got on the wrong form, then maybe they're answering the questions and they're just saying to get done. So on April 24th, we kind of revamped that whole thing, and it's a new complaint form, a different grouping of the products, sub-products, issues, and sub-issues. I think the jury's still out on whether we've improved that and made that better, but I think that's something to look at the data in the coming months and the years and see if we did that and see if we need to get back to the table a little bit. You know, one idea that has been raised to me a little bit was, should companies have the ability to put something in the response to say, this was the actual product that this consumer had? But again, the feedback was a little mixed. In some cases, we've heard from some industry folks that have said, I don't know if I want to be giving out all that information because that's proprietary information. It's also possibly consumers' private information, so should I be doing that? So it's an important issue. It's one that we continue to study and continue to look at. So I'll share my contact information in the slides, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And we've got a couple minutes left.
You mentioned that not all of the complaints get published. It's a consumer select. Is it an opt-in for them to publish it or an opt-out? I'm curious what percentage of complaints you receive do not get published.
It's a great, and there's actually two components of that question. It's about publishing the complaint and publishing the narrative. So the narrative is that piece, that consumer's description. So we publish, I mentioned about 750,000 in there. We've received somewhere about 1.2 million. So you can see that there's a good percentage that don't get published. Things that don't get published are those we refer to another regulator. Things that don't get published are the complaints where, for instance, a company says, you got the wrong company, this is not my customer. There's some other issues, and in those administrative responses, there's some things where if there's a pending legal matter, let's say a consumer has initiated litigation against a company but said, I'm going to submit a complaint also. The company can say, you know what, I'm not going to use two channels here. If we're going to go through litigation on this, the consumer initiated, I'll resolve the issue that way, so they can send that back. So that would be another one. The other thing that we don't publish is duplicates. Now, we worked with this a lot, and we evolved over a period of time, and we came up with a common sense approach to a duplicate. Sometimes a consumer would come back in, if they didn't like the answer that they got, they'll complain again. And a lot of times folks say, well, see, that's why there's so many complaints, because you put all those duplicates in there. We don't if the company tells us it's a duplicate. So the definition is a complaint from the consumer about, basically it's about the same product, the same issue. There's no new issue. There's no new information. There was no new recurrent. So again, if a consumer complains about something that happened on a Friday afternoon with X product at X branch of a company, and the company responds to that complaint, and the consumer doesn't like what the company responded to, they can't come back in and say, well, I still want to complain again. The company can take that, flag it as a duplicate, and then we won't publish that. So that's another one that doesn't get published. But to the question about the narrative about, and I haven't seen the numbers in the last 30 days, but about 58 to 60% of consumers who submit the form online elect to publish the complaint narrative. It changes, it's across different products. I think less, if it's a credit reporting complaint, less consumers want to put in the details of that. So it varies across products, but about 58 to 60% of consumers who come to our website directly elect to put that narrative in. And we've got just about a minute or so.
Thanks for the overview. Just piggybacking on that last question. So it seems like the process is that the consumer complains and then the complaint is sent to the company responds, and that kind of ends the process. And correct me if I'm wrong, incorrect in understanding that. I'm just curious, are there certain complaints that the CFPB would then start looking into or digging deeper into?
I'm sorry, and that last part was?
Are there certain types of complaints that the CFPB would then start looking into?
As far as like an individual problem that an individual consumer had, all the complaints go into a body of our work. But what we do is, like, we don't promise an individual resolution on behalf of the consumer. Now we've got teams that analyze complaints. We look for patterns, we look for spikes, we look for trends. We do some cohort analysis of complaints. We may reach out to a company privately about some issues, but what we don't do in an individual situation for an individual, like, again, we don't work for that individual resolution, and it's a little bit, to be honest, the sheer numbers of that, and a lot of our resources can be better directed towards, again, looking at, okay, was it an isolated issue, or is there a pattern of an issue? Is something going on here? So we may reach out to a company and ask some questions about a group of complaints, and then we might also share that might be part of the examination process, that they would look further. So what our basic bargain to the consumer is that we're going to get you a timely response, we're going to get it to a point at the company, and companies take this seriously, that we're going to, if you haven't been able to get that response before, a lot of consumers say the process works for them because they got the response from the level of the company that was able to look into their problem and either, you know, get them the answers that they couldn't get or get them the response that they didn't get. But there are, in some cases, that a consumer would be thinking that, you know, we should be working more of like a legal aid or something like that on their behalf. And we're pretty honest, we're pretty disclosed to that we can't act as your individual advocate or as an individual consumer's attorney or anything like that. But all of the complaints, the trends, the patterns that we analyze, that looks into some of the bigger issues where we could focus our resources. And that was a very good question. It's very insightful questions, and you know, a lot of the issues that we continue to discuss and evaluate are some of the things that you brought up today. I see the countdown is on. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Thank you all. I appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you.